Good morning. As you can see, I haven't had my coffee this morning. Welcome to the Deep 404. Let's just start off this morning with just a couple of pictures of how Gaza looks today. So these are images reportedly from earlier this morning in Gaza. You just get a sense for the destruction that has been inflicted on the city over the last few days. There has been further escalation in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. This has been carried out by the Israelis with missile strikes on 2 Syrian airports. Both the Damascus International Airport and the Aleppo airports have been put out of service, missile strikes damaging the runways sufficiently that they're unable to operate at the moment. The Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, Herzi Halevi, confirms the strikes in Syria were pre-emptive. His statement, or at least a brief line from his statement: "We destroyed the 2 airports and we challenge Iran and the Assad regime to respond to Israeli sovereignty. And this is a preliminary response." The Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is saying that every hour of delay in taking a unified position by Arab and Islamist countries means committing more Zionist crimes against the people of Gaza. And the Syrian Foreign Ministry is accusing Israel of seeking to escalate the situation in the region after the shelling of the airports in Damascus and Aleppo, and suggesting that these attacks are not like the previous Israeli attacks within Syria against Syrian militant groups, but this is an attack against the Syrian nation itself. So, escalation happening. There is still skirmishes happening on the northern border of Israel with Hezbollah. There is, of course, the ongoing fighting in Gaza and the West Bank with Hamas fighters. And now it looks as though there is a likelihood of escalation with Syria being involved. Britain has announced that it will dispatch 2 naval ships to the eastern Mediterranean and will commence surveillance flights over Israel in a demonstration of their support of Israel. This comes on the back of the Americans announcing that the Gerald Ford carrier strike fleet will be moved to the Mediterranean, and talks, again not confirmed yet, but the possibility of a second American carrier fleet, perhaps the Ronald Reagan nuclear-powered carrier, being moved to the region as well. The Americans have received warnings from numerous Arabic groups that if they become involved in the conflict, that all American bases and American assets within the region will become legitimate targets. Hamas has called for a global support from Arabic and Muslim nations to support their cause, and they have called for that to happen on today. Where I am in New Zealand early morning, it's now Friday the 13th. So over the next 24 hours, we will start to see if that call has been heard and listened to, and if there will be activities carried out by Arabic and Muslim supporting factions who are supporting Hamas, either by travelling to Israel to support there, or perhaps in other areas, as I've just mentioned, perhaps on American assets in the region, or perhaps even on American assets on American soil. There are multiple reports on social media channels of Hamas fighters having travelled to South America gained passports in South America, spent time studying Spanish, and have been travelling up to get through the open southern border of the US to infiltrate the US to be able to carry out attacks when commanded to do so within the US itself. I can't corroborate if these posts are true or not. However, it does seem that if you wish to get people into America, that would be one way to do that. There is daily footage of hundreds, if not thousands, of people a day crossing the border into America. These immigrants are ones considered to be illegal immigrants. They're not following the American immigration processes to gain entry. They are just coming across en masse into the southern states of America. Rybar Telegram channel do a great job of reporting upon conflicts. They've put some points together, summary points, which I'll go through, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as it sits yesterday afternoon local time. So they're suggesting that on the northern front, Palestinian groups have fired on Sderot, Yad Mordechai, Netiv, Hashara, Ashkelon, and several other towns bordering the Gaza Strip, but no major clashes have been reported in this area as yet, as the Israeli ground force invasion of the Gaza Strip has not yet commenced. Eastern and southern fronts. Palestinian Telegram channels report renewed clashes near Kibbutz Be'eri, although Israeli and other Arab sources have not confirmed this information yet. In the West Bank, clashes between Palestinian and Israeli forces continue on the West Bank. Several of these clashes or these incidents have occurred outside of the formerly Palestinian-controlled areas within the West Bank, with reports of clashes in the vicinity of Ramon settlements and Jenin. The West Bank area looks like a grouping, an archipelago of islands when you're talking about the areas which are Palestinian controlled versus Israeli settler controlled areas within the West Bank. It's not, the West Bank is not just one area with full Palestinian control over that area. There are areas which are excluded to Palestinians, and there are areas in there where there is Israeli settlements. It looks kind of like a grouping of islands. It's not a clear delineated area. The Gaza Strip itself, the Israeli Defense Forces are carrying out continuous fire on the Gaza Strip. Due to the density of residential areas, there have been many civilian casualties, with over 1,400 fatalities and at least 6,000 injuries reported. In the bit of political background, there is information on social media suggesting that Jordanian authorities may be closing their roads to the West Bank to prevent local residents from joining clashes with Israelis. And as Israel launches this massive counterattack against Hamas in Gaza, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reached a power sharing deal with his opposition leader Benny Gantz to form an emergency unity government expressly to prosecute the war. So in effect, the opposition and Benjamin Netanyahu's party have agreed to form a coalition for a period of time to allow them to push through any political requirements relating to this offensive without any pushback from the opposition political party. Egypt is facilitating the delivery of aid into the Sinai region for Gaza. Egypt said on Thursday that it was directing international aid flights for Gaza to an airport in northern Sinai, since delivery of relief into the Palestinian enclave of Gaza has so far been hampered by Israeli bombardments around the border. So the Rafah crossing between Sinai and Gaza it remains open. And however, it's not being used extensively because of the Israeli bombing of the Gaza side of that crossing area. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry has said that Egypt has asked Israel to avoid targeting the Palestinian side of the crossing. Now, in terms of commentary and rhetoric and just getting a feeling of how Israel and the West is approaching this in the media, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who was interviewed on Sky News, was asked about the impact of the Israeli blockade of electricity, fuel, and water to the Gaza Strip, and the impact that was having in terms of children, babies. And his response was, "Are you seriously asking about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you?" So you can, as I've mentioned before, you can sort of judge the level of hatred between Hamas and the Israeli military and the Israeli government. There's always a tweet. Interesting that their tweets have surfaced, one from Ursula von der Leyen and one from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky early in the year. The tweet from early in the year from Volodymyr Zelensky talking about the grain deal in Ukraine being shut off was, "There must be no famine. The right for food and clean water should be the basic human right. It must be a global goal. Anyone who tries to deprive people of food or water is an enemy to humanity. We must defeat such enemies together." Ursula von der Leyen says, "Russia's attack against civilian infrastructure, especially electricity, are war crimes. Cutting off men, women, and children of water, electricity, and heating, these are acts of pure terror, and we have to call it as such." So it's interesting that Zelensky and Ursula say this about Russia. However, they are voicing full-throated support for Israel in its blockade of Gaza. There has been obviously a lot of propaganda coming out. There was a story came out a couple of days ago, which Western media picked up, which reported that 40 Israeli babies had been beheaded by Islamist soldiers. Very quickly, people started to challenge that and ask for sources. Joe Biden spoke in a very weak and confused way about this, said that he couldn't believe that he would have seen videos of this, and indicated that he had. The White House has subsequently come out and said that no, he hasn't seen videos of babies being beheaded, and they don't have any confirmation of that, and that he was just basing his comments on what he'd been told by Benjamin Netanyahu. CNN has now come out and confirmed that the Israeli sources they were relying on cannot confirm the story of the 40 babies being beheaded. Now, this is not to belittle the fact that Israeli people were murdered, slaughtered, families, children were slaughtered by Hamas fighters. There does seem to be evidence of that. But again, as I've said, this emotive propaganda, trying to get people to choose a side, trying to influence people to choose a side with what are falsehoods, is not what we need. This just leads to more fighting. Clear reporting of what has actually happened, trying to get to the real reasons behind it. Both sides, having an understanding that both sides have reasons for doing things, but getting them out publicly available for people is what will help us get to a resolution of this situation. Just inflaming people's emotions, getting people to fight and hate one another because of bullshit stories does not help us at all. Continuing on with this, again, we're seeing in this area of propaganda, but also we see this the use of World War II stories to try to promote, the current position. This has been used a lot by the West in terms of Russia and trying to demonize Putin, liken him with Hitler from World War II, saying that if they don't defeat Putin now, it'll be just like World War II, when there'll be an enemy to the Western democracy rolling across Europe. Now, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has met with a press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and has said, "I stand before you not only as US Secretary of State, but also as a Jew. My grandfather, Morris Blinken, fled pogroms in Russia. My stepfather, Samuel Pizard, survived the concentration camps, Auschwitz and Dachau. Prime Minister, I understand this on a personal level. Hamas killings reverberate in the hearts of all Jews." Now, the Hamas killings are different to the reasons for their killings are different to the reasons for Hitler's race-based policies in World War II. Neither of them are good or acceptable. But again, trying to pull the history of World War II, which had nothing to do with Arabs and Hamas, into this conflict, again, doesn't help clarify the situation and what is really going on today and why it's really happening today. What are some interesting reports that have come out of Israel, though? Multiple reports of the Israeli police force, Zionist police force, so Israeli police and government that believes in the creation of an Israeli homeland, a land for Jews, Jewish homeland, which must be supported and defended at all costs. Clashes between the police force in Israel and Torah Jews, so very traditional Jews. There are a group of these ultra-Orthodox groups, the Neturei Karta and the Satmar Hasidism groups. They perceive Zionism and the establishment of the State of Israel as an anti-messianic and secular act, and they actually believe it's conceived in religious sin. The reason being is that it is it's a separation, it's a move away from the messianic teachings and the religious beliefs of the Judaism, and is a secular, political based desire to have this land. So these groups deny the legitimacy of the collective political return to the Holy Land and to Jewish sovereignty. And for them, it's not religious. It's not based upon their orthodox teachings. It's not the word of their Torah, the Bible, their Torah, their religious text, and is the handiwork of humans. So it's interesting. So there are clashes. I've seen video of a number of fights with police. In one case, a group of these Orthodox Jews were holding Palestinian flags and were protesting against the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians because they themselves don't believe in the political return and this holy land of Israel being created in the way it has. Just interesting conflicts within Israel itself. The UN some UN comments have come out. A number of UN experts have said that Israel's strike on the Gaza Strip are absolutely prohibited by international law and amount to a war crime. This because they state this amounts to collective punishment. There is no justification for violence that is indiscriminate and directed at innocent civilians, whether Hamas or Israeli forces. This is absolutely prohibited by international law and amounts to a war crime. the UN group said in a statement. They condemned the horrific crimes committed by Hamas, but noted that Israel has resorted to indiscriminate attacks on an already depleted Palestinian population living under an illegal siege for 16 years and having already endured 5 brutal wars. So this is, as I was saying yesterday, if the Israelis, I think, need to be careful with their response here, and that may even be why we haven't yet seen a large ground push into Gaza. Or it may simply be that Israel is preparing to perform more strikes on the city of Gaza before they move in. Or perhaps there are negotiations going on in the background to avoid that. Because, as I say, an overly heavy-handed approach by the Israelis in their response to the Hamas attacks and killing of Israeli civilians and Israeli soldiers will lead to a political undermining of their position. There are already very large groups, not only, of course, in the Arabic world, but in the West, who consider that Israel's position is already one of a very unbalanced situation where there is one very strong party holding control over a very weak party, and that the sort of destruction we've seen of Gaza already in the last few days, if that continues, will strengthen that support against Israel. Also, if Israel gets into a street fight within Gaza, I mean, you can see looking at these sort of images, you can just imagine the casualties, the losses that the Israeli IDF, the infantry, will suffer fighting through these areas. The Hamas fighters live in these areas, know them better than anyone else. They will be prepared for this urban fighting. Tanks in these areas become targets. We've seen in the Ukraine war right at the start with Russian tanks rolling through urban areas, how it's easy to hide 2 floors up in one of these buildings and fire an anti-tank missile down in the tank. There will be many high losses of Israeli defense forces if it becomes street to street, room to room, building to building, battling in Gaza. Okay, I think I will leave that there for today for this Israel update. Definitely something to watch is what happens with Syria. And if Syria decide that they have had enough and feel that they are now being attacked directly, and how they might respond. Also over the next 24 hours to watch what happens in the Arabic world with Hamas's call for action today. I'll put together a Ukraine update, which will come up just after this one. So just check the channel. There'll be an update there shortly as well. Hey, thanks for watching. I look forward to talking to you again soon.